Hello, everyone. Welcome back to No One's a Critic, the best podcast of all time. How are you doing this week, Mac?
I'm doing well. Me and my girlfriend just started to rewatch Haunting of Hill House. Did you see
Oh,
that
yeah.
show?
I like that show.
Yeah. All
For
of
the
his
first
stuff is
season, I like
good.
it.
Yeah. There's Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor, which is pretty good. I don't think it's as good as Hill House. And then there was Midnight Mass. Did you
Oh,
check
I
that
didn't
one
see
out?
that one now.
Oh, that one's fucking excellent. You should check it out.
Hmm.
Because Mike Flanagan has his fourth one coming out, The Fall of House Usher, I think. So I'm excited for that. Comes out in a couple weeks.
Are they. So, I mean, Haunting of Hill House and then The Blythe Manor are. I mean, it's kind of like an anthology show where it's a different premise each time, but it's kind of meant to be within the same series. Are the other two a part of the series as well?
Yeah, so technically the four shows are not related in any like they're not. It's not like True Detective where it's all True Detective. They're technically four separate shows, but
Ah,
they're all done by Mike Flanagan, and they're all like horror-esque miniseries that deal
yeah,
with like supernatural elements. And they even use what's kind of cool is that Mike Flanagan recast the same actors for
yeah.
different roles. So it's not an anthology series, but it kind of is. It's like the Mike
Hmm.
Flanagan universe in a way.
I guess.
Well,
That's
well, then again,
interesting.
I don't even know if you can say that because they're not technically in the same universe. Like, there's no indication that they're all happening in the same world. But it's cool. I like anything that he puts out. I fuck with Hill House and Midnight Mass especially. Bly Manor was really good. My girlfriend, funny enough, she loves that one. But I didn't think it was as. I don't think it was up to par. I mean, maybe on a rewatch. I don't know.
Huh, it actually says it is. It is the first two are part of an anthology. It says the Haunting anthology series.
No, but that's what I mean. It's funny because it's like, well, there's only two, so it's like,
Yeah, well,
well,
that's what I was asking. Because I mean, obviously there's a lot of crossover there where it's again it's different universes or whatever, but it's a very similar premise of a house that is haunted specifically, and it brings out these character dramas.
there's nothing haunted in Midnight Mass, so that's why it didn't work. Yeah,
I don't want to talk too much about this because this could be its own thing.
its
And
own
we're obviously
thing.
we're going to be doing a movie club episode today, but I just want to say that I really liked The Haunting of Hill House because it was like not really a horror show. It was like a family drama that was just kind of set to the
It's
backdrop of like a horror thing.
I think I would really I'm definitely gonna do a video on it because I love it. It's how did I put it? It's a character drama masquerading as like a horror series, basically.
And you could
Um,
say the same thing about a lot of shows, right? The
yeah.
Sopranos is a family drama masquerading as a mob show.
Yes.
So, but we are doing a movie club episode today, so we're going to be talking about Pulp Fiction, and the reason we are talking about this film is I tweeted out that I thought Reservoir Dogs was a better film than Pulp Fiction, which I know is a controversial opinion, and you replied to that tweet and was like, we should talk about this on the podcast because you have your own disagreements with my statement as well. So we're
Or
gonna be talking about it.
rather, should I ask? Maybe this is a better thing. Do you think Reservoir Dogs is a better film than Pulp Fiction, or do you simply consider it? Is it simple? Do you simply prefer it over Pulp Fiction? Is it one of those
That's
cases?
a good question. And it's kind of like our statement. It's kind of like we talked about last episode, where it's really hard to rank art objectively. I don't know if I could objectively say that Reservoir Dogs is a better film than Pulp Fiction. But I think I definitely prefer it. I like Pulp Fiction, and that's what we're going to be talking about this episode because it's Tarantino's most popular film by far. But I just felt that the elements that I liked in Reservoir Dogs, like the cohesiveness of the story and all that stuff, I liked more than Pulp Fiction. I thought Pulp Fiction's a good film. It just kind of took the elements that I liked about Reservoir Dogs and turned it up to 11, which is still good, but it's just not as good in my mind.
That's a good way to put it. Um, I remember when I first started getting into film, Pulp Fiction was like one of those movies where like, it was like every film bro was like, oh man, Pulp Fiction, it's like baby's first like film bro movie. Um, and I remember I watched it and I was like probably like 13 when I first saw it. And I remember not liking it. I remember actually like really disliking it. Um, but then when I got older and I rewatched it, um, not only did I understand, because when I first watched it, I really thought my first take on it was, oh, the nonlinearity is so uh contrived. It's not done with purpose. Now now when you rewatch it, I'm much more okay. Now I understand why he did it like this, and it's not just arbitrary. It actually does make sense. Um, However, I can see like, or at least to your perspective, Reservoir Dogs, that has a nonlinear structure, but that's done with a very a much more, what I'm looking for, blatant or like obvious narrative purpose.
It's
So
much more tied to like the plot and the mystery behind it all. Um, are you? I'm curious to get your take on this. Do you think that there is like a deep, like philosophical point that Pulp Fiction is making with its nonlinear timeline and the whole thing? Because I've heard a lot of like, again, film bros kind of give a spiel about like what Tarantino is trying to say in regards to that, and I've never been like wholly convinced by it. Like the theories I've heard, like one of the great examples was the film starts and ends with the scene at the diner where Tim Roth and his girlfriend are robbing the place, and the line that's delivered, like the very famous line that it opens with, it's like, "Any of you, motherfuckers, move, and I'll execute every last one of you." It's delivered slightly differently in the first scene versus the second scene, and people have debated about what that means, like symbolically. Like, was it Jewel? Like, are we seeing it from their perspective at the beginning, and then we're seeing it from Jewel's perspective at the end? Is this like a different timeline that changed when they survived the 1 in a million chance of the gunshot? Do you think that there's a deeper purpose behind that?
absolutely not. I've heard that theory. I think it's cap. I think they just shot two different. Like, I think they just shot, obviously, like the first scene they're shooting it from a certain angle, and then the other scene they're shooting it from like a handheld angle. They didn't shoot them at the same time. Um, I don't believe that. And no matter what Tarantino says, I think that's cap. I think it's literally just a matter of, it was like a little like just continuity error, and I think, because I think people actually, I think Tarantino commented on it. He said something along the lines of, it was like, well, it was supposed to show it was done purposely to show the difference of, um, memory. And I'm like, I don't know. I think I think that's kind of a cool continuity error that kind of results in that, and you can talk about it. But I think it doesn't. I think that's another issue with like. I think that's why I kind of got pissed off at Pulp Fiction when I first saw it, was because a lot of people were like, again, like baby's first like film bro movie. It's an excellent film. It's very good, but it's one of those movies where like film like level one film bros watch it and they're like, "Whoa, man, this is like the greatest piece of cinema ever." It's like, all right, just
I
chill.
I agree. I don't believe in that theory behind it. I mean, I do think that there is a theme of the film about like redemption and choosing the path of what path your life is going down, and these very kind of arbitrary things that happen that define how your life is going to turn out, is why Vincent dies very randomly, basically by accident, and Jules like survives. So I think there is a point behind that, but I think much more it's much closer to me like Goodfellas, where it's just kind of like a slice of life. We're just going through the ambiance of this world, going through the events with these characters, and it's more about the feeling of the film for me than any kind of like deeper plot or theme analysis. For me, it's the same feeling as Goodfellas, where it's like this is just like entertaining, and we're just going through the film with these characters and enjoying ourselves.
Yeah, I never really. I mean, like, again, it's one of those films where it's like, at least from my understanding, with Tarantino, what they were kind of going for was sort of like the. I always mispronounce this word, the vignette style.
Yeah, vignette.
Was it
Yeah.
Vignette? Yeah, and I think that it was based off of like pulp magazines and whatnot. Um, and yeah, and again, I if you rewatch the film, I do think that there is a very I do think there is a very purposeful uh the structure is very purposeful. I understand why they break it up like that. It makes a lot of sense. But sometimes I think people again, it's one movie where people like try to like, is he saying something about the nature of humanity? It's like I think we're at that's like where we're like, okay, we're reading like way too into it, and it's like, I mean, again, you can have those theories, of course. And again, it's hard with Tarantino because it's like he's so far up his own ass. I love him. I do. But he's so far up his own ass that like I can never like tell if like he's the person, like when you read Reddit threads and like people are like, oh, like all the symbolism in the show. And then a creator will come out and be like, yeah, I did not intend that at all. That was a complete accident. You're just reading into it. Tarantino's the person who probably has already read the Reddit thread of something like, here's a connection made in the movie that didn't intend, and then like he pawns it as if like, oh yeah, that was totally intentional. It's like he definitely seems like that kind of person.
I mean, his films are more like about just homages to the kind of cinema and television that he loves, and it's just kind of a love letter to those different genres. Then I think it is like he's not trying to make an art house film. I don't think so. I mean, obviously there is uh, a cinematic style behind this thing. He is developing this certain aesthetic in terms of like the dialogue and the cinematography and the way the films are paced and that kind of stuff. There is an art behind it that is very recognizable, right? We got to give Tarantino credit. He is one of those directors who you can instantly recognize his films even if you don't see his name attached to it. Um, but I definitely like if you look at his list, and we should also talk about the fact that he's only going to do 10 films overall, and our thoughts about that. But if you look at the films he's done, they're all homages to different things. Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction homages to like the gangster genre. Jackie Brown's an homage to like the black exploitation films. Kill Bill's an homage to those cheesy karate movies and shows. Inglorious Bastards, World War II kind of films like that. So they're all homages to different stuff.
Yeah, and to be clear, that I think that's sort of like one thing that he sort of gets a lot of charges of, which I don't really agree with. That all his films are just like, they're just homages. They're just like piecemeal of a bunch of other films, and he steals from other films. I think you can make that argument. That probably the best argument you can make for that is Reservoir Dogs. The whole City on Fire controversy and whatnot.
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh shit. Okay, yeah. So there is let me look it up. It's I think it's is it Hong Kong? Yeah, it's City on Fire, Hong Kong film. Let me see if I can find the synopsis. Um, an undercover cop investigating a group of jewelry thieves. Um, undercover mission. Yeah, the if you watch this movie, City on Fire, and then you watch Reservoir Dogs, it goes beyond like, I didn't realize. It's like, oh, there's some similarities. Like, no, it's pretty similar. It's like
Oh no,
very, very
I
similar.
guarantee Tarantino knew about he watches literally every single film in existence. Like,
Yeah,
he
I
knows about this.
I don't know. I actually don't remember what Tarantino has said about it. I don't know what his commentary has been on it. But
And I don't even
and
think
again, I
that's a
don't.
bad thing, that
Well,
he.
that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like I don't. It's like when people, it's like, oh well, he ripped it off. It's like, well, I mean, it's. I mean, I guess you could argue it's like, well, what if it wasn't like an actually sanctioned remake? Because from what I understand, City on Fire is not like a super good film. It's like it's all right, but it's like Reservoir Dogs was something different, and like the whole non-linear style, that was all Tarantino. At least to what I'm to my extent of knowledge. Um, but yeah, a lot of his fans I think cope about it. Like that people are like, "There's no way, bro, no." Because I think again, it falls into that like Tarantino is either someone who like he steals everything and everything, which isn't correct, or he's totally original and everything is like that's his style, bro. And it's like, in some cases, particularly City on Fire, Reservoir Dogs, I think he went too far.
Well, I mean, the title of Reservoir Dogs is literally stolen from two other films that he just put together. It has like the title has no connection to the film itself. It's just it's a reference to two other films that he liked that maybe they have some kind of subconscious influence on the film, but the the Reservoir Dogs name itself is not related at all to the film. And I don't think that's a bad thing. We have to remember that this was Tarantino's first real film, and even this one, he was originally going to shoot it himself on like a handheld camera for like 20 grand or something, and then he ended up getting financing because Harvey Keitel got the script and was able to put it in the right people's hands. But this was just going to be a small little project he was going to work on, and it kind of blew up and he got real success from it, which is good because it gave him the chance to actually have a career and make all the other films that we like from him.
It's funny that you mentioned that I'm just realizing now that you mentioned that I'm like, oh yeah, Reservoir Dogs doesn't really mean anything, does it? Well,
Yeah, no,
does it
literally nothing. Yeah.
like
But
nothing? Reservoir Dogs meaning one theory is that okay, yeah, no, he just and that's another thing too. I'm sure like if you ask Tarantino, it's like, oh, it means this. It's like it just sounds cool, which is fine.
yeah,
Um, I think I actually think that was if I'm not mistaken, uh, Inglorious Bastards. So you know how Bastards is spelled wrong.
yeah.
I think that he Tarantino did not misspell the title. So there's another film, Inglorious Bastards, but it's spelled with an
Hmm.
A, like it's
Yeah.
spelled. Tarantino did not misspell the title to differentiate his film from the 1978 movie by the same name. He said it instead was a creative decision, which he initially refused to explain, simply saying that Bastards was spelled as such because that's just the way you say it. Honestly, I think when he was writing the script, he just accidentally misspelled it and he just went with it, which is fine,
Yeah.
which is totally fine. But like, this is kind of when it gets to be the like, when I hear some people, it's like, no, man, it's like deep and shit. And it's like, I don't think it's cheap. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But, but again, like Tarantino's so far up his own ass, he'll never like actually just cop to yeah, I didn't intend to with the
Yeah.
script.
And like I said, I think that a lot of these films are pretty simple in what he was trying to do with them. And I'm curious to hear. I know we're focusing this around Pulp Fiction, but you mentioned before we got started that you didn't think that Reservoir Dogs, one, it wasn't his best film, but two, more than that, you think it actually didn't hold up as a good film, which is a very spicy take for me because Reservoir Dogs is not my favorite film of all time, but it's in my top three favorite films of all time.
I think, or maybe I misspoke. I don't think it's necessarily a bad film. Well, I don't think it's a bad film. I do think it is a film that, for its time, it was very. This is very similar to a lot of any sort of like revolutionary film where,
Yeah.
in most cases, not all, but
Hmm.
they're films where they're like, hey, they were like super groundbreaking for the time, but has like this format or the style has it kind of been perfected, maybe even by the same director or other directors later on?
Hmm.
I think so. I think like when you watch Reservoir Dogs, it does feel pretty rough around the edges, which isn't a bad thing. Not to say
Yeah.
like that. And maybe like you could even argue that that's a plus to it. It just
Yeah.
feels like a very raw film. Um, Honestly, I even feel this way about like something like Breathless. That's regarded as one of the most like one of the, if not the most revolutionary film of all time. Even that film is a film that I'm like, I understand for its time it was so revolutionary with all its filmmaking. um what's the word I'm looking for, innovations.
Hmm.
But I definitely think that like when you rewatch it now, it's at least for me, it's like okay, I can kind of see what he's doing, and he's kind of what's what I'm looking for. He's traveling uncharted waters, if you
Yeah.
will. Um, but then as time went on, it's like okay, but I've seen other films that have like perfected this sort of style. That doesn't mean the film is bad per se, and I think with the context, it makes it even more fascinating. I think with Reservoir Dogs, particularly, it's a film where if you like, you really had to understand like when it came out, like people were like, "What the fuck is this
Oh
movie?"
yeah.
Even Pulp Fiction, to some extent, that was a
Oh no,
movie that was
definitely.
like, "Holy shit, what is this?"
Yeah, no, I think that you're definitely right. I mean, Reservoir Dogs is a rougher film than Pulp Fiction, which, again, for me, Pulp Fiction just took the elements that I really liked about Reservoir Dogs and amped it up to 11.
Mhm.
But for me, again, like you said, Reservoir Dogs started something that you didn't see before then, but everyone was trying to copy it after that. This whole genre of like gangsters talking to each other in ways you wouldn't expect, talking just like regular people, or making references to television and other stuff. And it was just very groundbreaking for that. And I just think Reservoir Dogs is just a very well paced, well put together film where I'm enjoying every moment as it's leading up to the reveals of what happens. I do have one slight criticism where I thought Mr. Orange's storyline, once it's revealed that he's the cop, I thought his backstory went on a little bit too long. I thought we could have cut maybe one of those scenes of him getting into character or whatever. But I understand also the purpose. It's like he's kind of going through like a Stockholm syndrome with these gangsters. I don't think every single element of that storyline was perfect. I thought the relationship between him and Mr. White, and why Mr. White was so like protective of him, could have maybe been developed a little bit more. But again, for what it was, I mean, it was just it was so incredible for me to see, and that's why again it's one of my top three favorite films. Um, but yeah, Pulp Fiction, it had those same qualities, but even though it was a smoother kind of experience where like the dialogue was tuned up more, and the non-linearity was tuned up more, it just didn't have that same kind of perfect cohesion to everything that the mystery of like the diamond heist and Reservoir Dogs had for me.
That makes sense. Um, I think definitely what really well, Tarantino is obviously Pulp Fiction in particular. Um, I remember we talked about this in like Discord a while back, but it really popularized obviously like this the whole like Tarantino was incredibly influential for better or worse in the fact that yes, he did, he really did like sort of like break a lot of walls down in terms of independent cinema moving forward throughout the 90s. However, he's also credited with probably being one of the most like ripped off, or not even ripped off, but like what's the word I'm looking for? Like like he's an homage director, but then a bunch of like film students like would write their scripts, and it's like, hey, look, man, it's just these two dudes talking, saying funny shit. And what's really, and I think a lot of people sort of uh still harp on about that about Tarantino, where it's like, oh well, man, his dialogue and it's just people talking. Particularly in Pulp Fiction, I actually really disagree with that. So, for example, I mean, in some cases, I guess, but probably the most famous example is the opening scene. No, sorry, after the opening scene of Pulp Fiction, it's when um, Vincent and Samuel Jackson are driving to the job, and they're talking about quarter pounder with cheese, yada yada yada. And so a lot of people frame that scene as if it's like, oh well, it's just two dudes talking, and they're just talking about a bunch of bullshit, and it's like that's cool, that can be film. And what so many people miss about that scene, and I actually think this is why the film is so brilliant, is that it isn't just two dudes talking. That isn't just what's happening. What's happening is that, and again, I understand it's difficult to sort of, because it's so iconic, you kind of can't put yourself into the headspace. When you first watch that scene, you don't know that John Travolta and Samuel Jackson are hitmen. you literally just think they're two dudes, just very similar to the opening scene where it's just two diners and they're talking about robberies, and then all of a sudden they're planning it, and you're like, oh shit, they're actually robbers. In that scene, when you're watching it, you're not supposed to know when you first watched a film that Samuel Jackson and John Travolta are hitmen. So it's just, oh, why are these two dudes just talking about whatever? And then they open the trunk and then they start pulling out guns. And you're like, wait a minute, hold on, where the fuck are they going? And then they're walking up to the door and they're just talking about bullshit. So that entire sequence is them just talking about whatever. But if you're putting yourself into the headspace of a first time watcher, that entire sequence is like a huge building of tension because at first you don't know who these guys are. Oh shit, they have guns. What are they doing? And but then there's the comedy aspect of it, the satirical aspect of here are these two hitmen that apparently are going to a job that are going to like kill somebody and they're just shooting the shit the whole time. And there's even that moment where they are about to go into the door. Remember that? Where they're about to go in, they're like, let's give it like five more. Yeah. Yeah, that was a brilliant sequence. But again, people misinterpret it like, oh, it's just them talking. And it's like, that's not, there's so much more happening.
And it's the same trick he pulled at the beginning of Reservoir Dogs too, which I would argue if you watch Reservoir Dogs first and like the iconic, black jackets or black suits, black ties, white shirts, you might get a hint that these guys are criminals in some context. But the opening of Reservoir Dogs did the exact same thing, right? Where they're just in a diner, they're chatting about Madonna, they're chatting about tipping and everything. And then it smash cuts from that to, Tim Roth bleeding out in the car. And you're
Hmm.
like, what the fuck happened here? So again, for me, Pulp Fiction is carrying on all those elements that Reservoir Dogs did, and in some ways improving it. I think that the dialogue and the fact that the characters are actually moving through the scene is better than them just kind of sitting at the diner just chatting back and forth with each other. But you're right, there is more going on there to this dialogue, and I think even from a cinematography point of view, the film is not just people talking. There's a lot going on with like the dance scene in Jack Rabbit Slims or whatever, the heroin scene, the stuff with Butch. There's a lot of moving parts there, more so than Reservoir Dogs. Reservoir Dogs, I mean, you could tell it was filmed on the cheap, and it was just them at a bunch of locations just talking. But they had a budget this time where we're able to actually kind of do some interesting stuff in that regard.
I think you put it perfectly. When I think of, because again, the opening scene of Reservoir Dogs is also cited as like the film, like, oh, they're just talking. I think the opening of Reservoir Dogs was sort of like the test run for that opening 20 minutes
Yeah,
with Jules and Vincent in Pulp Fiction. That's kind of how I view it. Very similar to how I view Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, where it was
yeah,
like Breaking Bad was very like it broke down the barriers, it was trying all these new things, and then Better Call Saul came and sort of like
yeah,
perfected everything.
yeah,
Pulp Fiction to me is like, and again, but again, then you could argue that, well, as I mentioned, like, with Reservoir Dogs being more like rough around the edges, is there sort of a charm to that? Very similar to Goodfellas and Casino.
yeah. I agree.
As
Agree with
time
that
has gone
completely.
on, a lot of people have said like, well, Casino is such a more well constructed and well polished film.
Yeah,
Which I think that if you watch them both, I think it's hard to disagree with that. I think Casino is from a strictly like filmmaking standpoint, that film is like insane.
yeah,
But when you watch Goodfellas, obviously you can see how much of a huge influence. Like this
yeah,
was
yeah,
Goodfellas was the test run, and he still
yeah,
made one of the greatest films of all time. So.
yeah. No, and we should say the opening scene of Reservoir Dogs. There is a deeper character stuff going on there, like we're getting an insight to who these characters are. Mr. Pink is cheap and he's the one who survives. Mr. White standing up for the waitresses. Mr. Orange is it rats on Mr. Pink about the dollar, and it turns out he's the rat at the end. So there is some interesting stuff going on there beyond just the talking. But yeah, definitely smoothing things out can result in it being a better picture overall, which I think most people would say Pulp Fiction's a better film than Reservoir Dogs. I don't think I'm alone in that, but I think that like that's a more minority take. But yeah, I agree that like having that kind of rough charm from an artist's earlier work can be lost as things get really polished down. And um, I think even Scorsese, right? I think the charm of his early work is not really there in his later stuff. They're
Hmm.
still good films, but it's not the same. And I'm really curious to see how Killers of the Flower Moon is going to be. If I had to wager, I think it's going to be more on the side of like The Irishman than it is than Goodfellas, or even something like Taxi Driver or whatever. But we'll have to wait and see.
I think that's fair. That's I already bought my ticket. Actually, I'm going to see it on because me and my girlfriend are going to the Chicago Film Festival. We're
Oh
seeing, I
yeah,
think,
yeah.
like 5 or 6 films.
It comes out
Um,
next week, doesn't it?
no, I think like 3 weeks. Um, oh, I'm seeing The Killer at the Chicago Film Festival,
Oh,
Fincher's new
gotcha,
film,
gotcha.
which I'm very excited about. That I might even do a review on it.
October
Um,
20th. That's when it comes out.
yeah, and I'm seeing it the 23rd because I have that
Okay,
Monday
cool.
off, and
Yeah, yeah,
I cleared my schedule with this long film, and I made sure I picked a comfy theater that I know has
yeah.
like the reclining seats and shit.
Yeah, I definitely
Um,
want to go to actually a theater and see it. I most of the time I hate going to the theater with other people because I just want to uh, experience the movie without the noise or distractions. But I'm curious this time to see what other people are gonna think about it, because this is such a hyped up movie in terms of like there's a whole like Scorsese versus Marvel thing going on right now on the internet. Not, I mean, it's been going on for a while, but it's like really heated up as the film is approaching. So I'm really curious to look around at the theater and see like what type of people are going to see this film when it comes out. I'm definitely gonna go see it opening night too.
yeah, I'm excited for it. I mean, like again, it's one of those things where it's like I do agree with you. I think that a lot of Scorsese's later work has kind of, like you said, lost that sort of. And again, maybe I'm going back on my own point about Reservoir Dogs, where Taxi Driver or Mean Streets or Raging Bull, even though these were brilliant, even Goodfellas, even though these were brilliant films, they did still kind of have this sort of like rough around the edges feel because he was doing stuff that like people had like never seen before. Mean Streets, especially, that was like his first breakthrough into like. Have you seen Mean Streets?
I've not seen Mean Streets. That's the one I haven't seen.
That's a film where like I almost think that like it's actually a pretty flawed film, I would say, but it's unbelievable when you watch that film that you can tell, sort of like Reservoir Dogs, that oh shit, this was like a huge movie. This is like inspired. This movie inspired so many other films, but it's funny because it's one of those films that I don't think is given as much credit for as influential as it was.
And it's interesting we brought up Scorsese alongside Tarantino too, because I think of both of these guys in the same way, and it's interesting regarding the ongoing debate between like the Scorsese fans and the Marvel fans. There's like this. I mean, I don't want to overstate it. It's not like
Oh,
a
this,
serious conflict or whatever, but there's like
yeah,
discourse going on like Twitter and other stuff of like the Marvel fans being like, why is Scorsese talking shit? Like all he makes is like gangster films, right? It's not highbrow art. And I would
and it's
agree
like oh,
for
so
a lot of
you've
it.
And it's like, yeah, so you have no idea about Scorsese's career. Great. Thank you for telling us,
Yeah, well,
informing us of
not
this.
even that though. Which I mean, yeah, you're right. Like Taxi Driver and these other ones, there is some art to that. But even if you looked at something like Goodfellas, Casino, whatever, and you said, hey, there is not a difference artistically, right, between this and Marvel. Like it's a male fantasy kind of like thing. I would say maybe that's fair from like a an action standpoint, but I think that the larger point that Scorsese was trying to make when he was talking about when he was criticizing Marvel is not that his films are all art house films and that's why they're better than Marvel films, but it's just that there is a artistic vision behind this and a desire to entertain. In some cases, it's not always, like I said, Goodfellas to me is not like a deep character study of Henry Hill. It's just entertainment. But there's an art behind that entertainment that Marvel, that these kind of big studio films that are planned as like part of a big multiverse don't have. They're not made by one auteur. They're made by a committee with the intention of setting up a dozen other films that are going to make $1 billion.
What's so bullshit about that too is that if you actually read what everyone thinks Scorsese said, what everyone thinks he said was, you know, Marvel films are trash, yada yada yada, and that's not what he said. What he said was, I fear that it's creating an impression among film goers that this is the only type of film that exists. That's kind of what his point was. We're like big Hollywood blockbusters, and not like 70s blockbusters, like, like shitty, like Transformer, that sort of blockbuster we're talking about. Um, like The Godfather was a blockbuster, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the popcorn film, which is fine. But I think his point was simply, look, I just don't want that to be the, because when people think about, we've even talked about this, you have like the film enthusiasts who are like, yeah, man, I'm really passionate about film. And then and they're like, yeah, film is dying. And it's like, well, yeah, it's because you only watch Disney shit. You talk about, like, that's all you watch. You watch Star Wars and whatever like Disney puts out. That's technically is Disney, so that fits. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's what Scorsese was saying, was like, look, I just want you to be able to just have some perspective on the world of film. And that's all he really said. He could, and to be fair to him, he could have been way meaner. He could have been way harsher. He probably should have been, but
And again, I think he said that he likes some of the Marvel films, but again, I think you're right. It's just a matter of Marvel dominating the industry, and no, there's not really room for other films to exist. And I will
exactly.
say I agree with you. It's not Marvel's fault that that's happening, right? They're not. I mean, you could argue they have a monopoly, but they don't really. Like other films could be made, but the problem is no one really goes to see them. And that's why he was also really encouraging people to go see like Oppenheimer and other films like this, because it's like, no, give a chance for more films to actually exist beyond just like big franchise films. And I think we will get there. Marvel and DC have been like in a big slouch recently. We called it right in that episode we did about the future of Marvel. It really seems like that's the trajectory things are going, and even Disney has kind of stated that like uh, they they've been in kind of a downward spiral for a while, and they're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, it's like just clinging on to like these franchises, like with Star Wars, but even people are getting sick of Star Wars, or like you have like your core audience who will like eat up whatever shit that you put out there, but that's sort of like a cap where I think people. I remember saw, oh, it was Lindsay Ellis's video when she was talking about Twitter. She pointed out something interesting where at some point, like the number of Twitter users kind of leveled off. Like people weren't joining Twitter, and the problem is that when that happens, is obviously your revenue share has to keep going up. So instead of trying to um, add more users, you're trying to get as much engagement from the current user base, and that's kind of what we're probably seeing. That's kind of what we're seeing now on Twitter, just turning into a clusterfuck. And I think Disney is that's kind of what's happening, where it's like they have their like core IPs and they're just churning out all this shit, knowing that the people will. Oh, if we slap Star Wars on it, you're gonna eat that shit up, no matter what we put out. If we throw Marvel Cinematic Universe on it, doesn't matter the quality, doesn't matter anything. Well, even that's kind of waning because now a lot of
They're
these
finding out that it's like it's the audience is getting very sick of these franchises, and
fuck
I think
around,
that's what's
find out.
interesting about this whole kind of movement to like worship Scorsese as a god, which I don't agree with either. And that's why I was connecting it back to Tarantino, because it's the same thing. I think a lot of these movies are just entertainment, and that's fine because they're high quality entertainment. They're well put together. There is a vision behind it, but it's not like an art house film or anything like that. And I that's what I think was a little bit disingenuous about a lot of this, kind of putting these directors like Scorsese and Tarantino on a pedestal. Is it's not that their films are flawless or art house masterpieces or anything like that, but it's just something different than the kind of schlock that Disney and Marvel or whatever have been putting out lately. And I think that's why people are really gravitating towards them, and there's this movement to kind of like, no, let's go back to some more like, not independent, because these guys are not independent, but you know what? Not big studio franchise films.
Kind of like back how it was in the '70s with New Hollywood, where it was like you had these like like again, The Godfather was a blockbuster. Jaws was a blockbuster. But these were films that had like high artistic quality. They weren't just like churned. That's kind of what the 80s brought in, of just like all the churned out bullshit.
And
Except The
we go through
Wizard, that
cycles
movie.
with this stuff.
Yeah, except The Wizard, that movie is unbelievable.
Yeah,
Have you seen
all
The
right.
Wizard?
The NES movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
With the power glove.
He touched
So bad.
my breast.
Remember that when that was like played like for laughs, and it's like, wait a minute, it's bullshit
That's
too.
deeply horrifying.
It's deeply.
Like
And then
as a modern man in modern society, the idea of being falsely accused like that is like deeply horrifying.
and then it's bullshit too, because like that guy, isn't he like trying to find like a lost kid or something? Like they
He
kidnap,
was
no, they
trying to
don't
find
kidnap the
them.
kid. Yeah, but I think he's trying to find the kid for the parents, and they're like, he's the bad guy. It's like, wait a minute, I think he's just doing his job. He's doing a like he's doing a good thing, isn't he? I don't know, but
Um, I wanted to bring it back because we talked a little bit before that Tarantino has stated he's the next movie is going to be the last movie. It's called The Movie Critic. It's his
yes,
10th film, and it'll be the last thing he ever does. Well, I mean, he's going to do other stuff, but not any other like kind of mainstream movies like this. There's some people really praising him as like having integrity as an artist and like sticking to his word and not staying longer than he should. And there's other people who are kind of like lambasting him as like, you're just doing this like for for promotion, and you're just trying to like hype yourself up. Where do you fall on that argument?
I mean, getting mad at Quentin Tarantino for hyping himself up is the stupidest. That's like it's like, what did you expect, bro? That's like him in a nutshell. Um, no, I think it's, if he only wants to make 10 films, he should only make 10 films. I think that's completely fine. I'd rather him do that than, I mean, I don't want to say, not to say anything bad about him. Well, maybe not just him, but like other directors. Like if you take other directors like Scorsese or Ridley Scott or even Spielberg, I think there are cases where I've seen films of theirs where I'm like, it's not so much that like, it's not that you're making bad films, but it does come off as if like you did phone stuff in. I think even Scorsese came out and said, I don't think he says he regrets making it, but I think he said he wasn't a huge fan of Shutter Island. Well, actually, hang on. Let me actually look up.
I was thinking of Scorsese when you were like beginning that sentence. I think not that he is not welcome, because like I said, I'm really excited for his next film, but there have been times where I felt like you are kind of overstaying your welcome a little bit with some of these films. Like, not that they're bad films, like you said, but I just, that it doesn't ruin your legacy or whatever. But these are like the weaker entries in your amazing, list of films.
Which isn't, to be fair, that's not saying anything when it comes to Scorsese. But it's something like, even The Departed, I always felt like that wasn't really a film that it seemed like he was like, it didn't really, I mean, like, I have my issues with that film, and he made the shit out of that movie. Same with Shutter Island. But these didn't really feel like films that were like,
You didn't
again, I
need
don't want,
them.
or not even that, but it's not even, I don't want to say like soulless, because again, he made the shit out of the film and they were excellent films, but they didn't really feel like, it didn't have the same impact as like other films where it really felt like he was giving it his all. And again, I don't want to say that. It's not that he wasn't giving it his all. It was simply that it was it just, maybe he just wasn't the best pick. I still am a little confused as to why they picked him for Shutter Island. Like The Departed, I kind of get, because it's a gangster film, even though like I don't think that that probably was not a good matchup, because it's a very plot heavy story. Um,
Shutter
but like, yeah,
Island
Shutter
is a film
Island.
I
What?
always forget that he did. Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't even register to me as a Scorsese film. The same way, like The Aviator, that's like another one that like we didn't need this film. I don't really associate it with him too strongly.
or Gang. That for me, that's Gangs of New York. I don't that
Gang,
movie's,
Gang is Gangs of New. God,
it's a
Gangs of New York.
strange movie. I don't get it.
I I feel like I should really like it, but I don't. And
No,
that's
I do
really
not like.
weird considering considering, I mean, it has, Daniel Day Lewis. It's got like this just incredible cast. I love the era that it's set in. Like, I should enjoy this film, but I don't.
And I will say that, like, and I don't mean to say this like to like try to be like a Scorsese fanboy, because um obviously it's, he's the director, and so he has a lot of pull over this stuff anyway. But it's just weird when you see him kind of go from his more, because you watch films like Mean Streets, um, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, even King of Comedy to some extent, Goodfellas, even Casino. These were films that were not very. They were more like, I think he even said that The Departed was the first film he ever made with a plot. Now, I don't think that's true. I think Gangs in New York has a pretty clear plot. But I think with Scorsese, he's much more of a director who's about story. He's about sort of like just storytelling and character work, and kind of like you mentioned, like slice of life. Even Raging Bull, even though it was a character study, it kind of spanned his career. It's done so in a very fluid manner. It's just jumping all over the place. We're just trying to get a sense of who this man is and his character. It really isn't uh, focused specifically on like the movie isn't focused on Jake LaMotta's career. It's focused on Jake LaMotta, and of course, it explores his career. Whereas it seems like with some of his other films, Gangs in New York, Shutter Island, The Departed, these were films that were far more like plot heavy, or they were focused less on the actual characters, or they were there, but they were kind of like the actual plot of it kind of took over, and it didn't kind of give Scorsese the room to experiment. Now, I almost wonder, and in a way, that's almost why I'm a little bit nervous about Killers of the Flower Moon. Well, part of me is that because the film is so long, I wonder if we're gonna have the best of both worlds, where it's like you have this huge runtime where you can still encompass a story, like an actual like cause and effect plot and whatnot, but there's also plenty of time for that world building, or just that very natural storytelling that he's so good at. But then again, The Irishman wasn't that good in my opinion. So
I mean, that's what I'm really waiting to see. Like, will this be a return to greatness, or will
The
it be
Irishman 2.0.
Irishman 2.0, which is still a great film, but it's like, and I'm glad it's made, and I'm glad people are excited about it. A lot of people like The Irishman, which I'm glad for. Like, anything that kind of celebrates, interesting cinematography, I'm in favor of. I want to. We keep going back to Scorsese, obviously because the film's coming out, but I want to bring it back to Tarantino here a little bit. So you talked before how Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction are not Tarantino's best work. What would you say is his best work?
I mean, if I like gave Pulp Fiction like a full rewatch, maybe. I think he himself has said Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is his best. Um, which I definitely can see an argument for that. For being what it was. That's another film. I think it has a lot of Pulp Fiction DNA in it. Um, even Inglorious Bastards, I think that was also, you can kind of see the strands of, his very novelistic approach to storytelling, which is very present in Pulp Fiction and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think that's kind of where he's strongest. His sort of like vignette storytelling and how they're interlinked. Um, Funny enough, I actually didn't like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when I first saw it, but then upon sitting with it and rewatches, that film really leveled up in my opinion. It was very strange. So sorry to answer your question. I don't know. It's weird. Maybe it's just a thing for me. I'm bordering on the Kill Bill films. I think those films are fantastic. That whole story, that whole saga is just, and but I think with the caveat that like those are two of his films, or like the one film, I guess you'd say, Kill Bill as the whole thing. Um, that's a film where it was very clear what he was doing, what he was trying to do, and it was very like dead set on that goal, which it maybe is what's what I'm looking for, a bias of mine, which I tend to be very, I think that's kind of more my style. And there are some films like, Pulp Fiction, Hollywood, that are less plot centric and more just about kind of like quote unquote hangout films or slice of life films that I still enjoy, but they're just not my personal cup of tea. Um, but yeah.
I think those are great choices. Like Kill Bill is interesting because many people wouldn't say that's. I mean, they obviously like the film, but many people would not say that's his best film overall. Um, I think it's a really good film too. For me, I would have to say I think it might be Jackie Brown, even though that's not my favorite of his films.
Ah,
And I know what people are going to say to that. They're going to
you
say you're just
contrarian
choosing
piece of
that
shit.
film
Yeah.
because it's a black woman in the lead and you're trying to be, to placate whatever. And I'm
Oh,
like,
I didn't
no.
even. I just thought you were being contrarian. I
No,
thought you were.
contrarian or but like or you're pandering to like the
Yeah.
the woke mob or whatever. And I'll say to prove you wrong, I will say I did not like Django Unchained. I actually don't like that film.
Yeah.
Um, it was fine for what it is, but I would not put it on. The Hateful Eight too. I didn't really like the film either.
See, I like Hateful Eight for what it was. It kind of had like that Roadhouse like mystery. Well, it's also hard to if you look at Hateful Eight as like a stage play, as like a play, I think it plays a lot better. Um, which I like because I'm a big Agatha Christie fan, so I could see the influences in the Hateful Eight. Um, but yeah, what is it like 3 hours long? It's like, all
I
right,
don't
bro, chill.
his Western arc where like he was doing the two Western films. I did not like him.
Yeah, I mean Django was. I thought it was fun, but
It was
yeah,
all
it was
right, but
more of
it's
his.
like I said, I
Yeah,
wouldn't put it back on. But
yeah.
Jackie Brown, for what it is, I think synthesizes all the kind of stuff that he was doing for the first two films in not as much an in your face way as Pulp Fiction, but like we've got the homage stuff to the classic, black exploitation films. We have a kind of core, not a mystery per se, but like a core kind of what's the word, like tension building to like this climax of what's going to happen with these characters. um they're well written characters for the most part. I loved a lot of the people in that film. So I, even though it's not my favorite, personal favorite overall, that's got to be Reservoir Dogs. I think it, what he was able to accomplish in there, it was one of his best and most understated films. Like it wasn't in your face in a way that the rest of his catalog is.
There was a sweet spot, and I even think this is the case with Kill Bill. I think Inglorious Bastards, as much as I love it, I think it's a great film. I do think that was like sort of like the start of Tarantino. He's always been so far up his ass,
Yeah,
but I will say that I do think he was somewhat, at least in terms of his filmmaking, he was a lot more humble in his early days,
yeah,
particularly Jackie Brown and even Kill Bill. I think Kill
yeah.
Bill, those
I can see
films
that.
are. I think that's like a perfect synthesis of like he was wearing so many of his influences and homages on his sleeve that it was like
Yeah,
it was a fun romp.
yeah.
But then when Inglorious Bastards came around, I think again I love that film, but I do think that's where he kind of started to get up into his own ass, where he was
I could
like,
really see that.
I'm making the World War II film, and then Django and Chan making a slavery film,
Yeah.
and again, there's a lot of good stuff in both those movies. But I think that's kind of where he started to get, and then of course he made Hateful Eight, and it's like, all right, bro, like back off the throttle.
Those three films, I really see what you're saying. Those three films, there's an element of like not that like Jackie Brown doesn't have like an homage to it too, but those three films in particular, Glorious Bastards, Django Unchained, and Hateful Eight, there was this element of look at me, like aren't I so great for making a film where Jews kill Nazis? Oh, aren't I so great for making a film where a slave kills his former slave owners? Like it does feel they do feel a little up their own ass, and I love Inglorious Bastards too. It's a very thoroughly entertaining film. But and if you see interviews of him during that time too, he started like talking, like people made fun of him for like when Django came out talking with like a black accent and like being like, oh yeah, me and my homies here were like, we finna make a film about slave. Like it was very cringy. And I don't like that era of Tarantino. Even though I love Inglourious Basterds, I don't like that era of him.
Yeah, it's funny that we're talking about this because I was on his Wikipedia page and I just saw a quote. Apparently, in regard to David Lynch's Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, he said, Lynch has disappeared so far up his own ass that I have no desire to see another David Lynch movie until I hear something different. And it's like, bro, who's, come on, man. It's weird to say that because I actually never thought that Lynch was like that. I always thought Lynch was very, um, he was. Maybe that's just, I guess, because he's always been David Lynch. All of his films have been Lynch films, so him going up his own ass is just like him doing David Lynch.
I've said before on this podcast, I don't understand David Lynch. Like he's like a being that I will not be able to comprehend in my lifetime.
And again, it's one of those things where it really brings up an interesting point about film criticism, where if would you like a David Lynch film? Well, again, it's hard to say because like watching a David Lynch film, you probably know it's a David Lynch film. It's very difficult. He's probably one of the few. I mean, in most cases, there are some movies that don't fall under that, but in most cases, I would say his style is so distinct that I'm like, I mean, Lynchian. Like he has his own like genre of description. Um, but it's like, how do we, when we're talking about Mulholland Drive or Inland Empire, do we rank? Do we judge these films as Lynch films, or do we judge them as? It's kind of like an interesting question. Say, I even think Tarantino has fallen um, under that roster, especially when like Inglourious Bastards came out. Should we? Does Tarantino's aesthetic and his style, does that sort of influence how we should look at this film instead of judging it as we would any other film? And I think it's an interesting question. I don't exactly know what the answer is, but
Yeah, I think it's hard to get because they're all trying to accomplish their own thing, and I think looking at his films and picking like what the best one is, you almost have to grade them on like a curve, because like I said, obviously Reservoir Dogs is his roughest film of all from a cinematography perspective, but it was his first, and he's learning as he goes. So comparing it to something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is difficult unless you're grading it on the curve of Tarantino, and again of like what he was trying to accomplish with that film and how impactful it was, and it definitely was. So I mean there is no objective analysis of these films. Like he is definitely someone who is trying to say something, and it's interesting enough that we talk about it, right? There's plenty of directors who we will never mention on this podcast because they just weren't interesting enough to validate any kind of discussion. So love him or hate him, he is someone.
funny enough, we were talking about sort of because I'm always interested in that sort of dynamic between like test run films. Like a director will make a film, and then you can see later in his career or their career that they kind of like not remade the film, but like there's another film that like really fits in that's very similar to it, and it's like a more like polished version. So I think of like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, Goodfellas and Casino, um, and one or even Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction to some extent. One connection I saw was Inglorious Bastards and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So one of my big gripes with the ending of Inglorious Bastards wasn't so much that there was the whole controversy over when at the end of the film, spoiler alert, they kill Hitler. Now, on one hand, I think you could argue that it's like, well, because when you're watching the film, Hitler doesn't die wherever they're trying to kill him. So the tension comes from, oh, that they're not going to succeed. How is it going to end? But then they end up doing it, and you're like, what the fuck? And then you realize you're in a different universe. And I get that. However, at least for me, I don't necessarily know if that was like super purposeful or if that was just kind of like Tarantino having fun or going for shock value. I mean, if it is, that's fine. But for me, the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the ending is very similar in that vein, and that it rewrites history. However, I think that the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a lot more purposeful in what it's trying to say. It's a
Oh,
very
I agree 100%.
the message it's trying to convey with that is very, very, very clear, and it's almost very it's extremely like cynical about almost you could even argue about like Hollywood and filmmaking and fairy tales and stories. The whole film is and that's part of the reason why I think when I rewatch it, it really has risen in the ranks for me. Um, but yeah, so I almost wonder if that's a film where the Inglorious Bastards, the ideas he was flirting with the ending, he mastered in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yeah, it's another
I
one of
definitely
those.
think the ending of Inglorious Bastards is just fun. Like it's
Yeah,
and it's that thing I said before where it's like, aren't I so great for killing Hitler in my film? Or don't I deserve a bunch of praise?
yeah,
Again, still a great movie. But yeah, the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is much more purposeful, and it's weird to say tasteful because it is also an extremely violent, vulgar kind of ending. But I would say that I felt it had more class than the ending of Inglorious Bastards had,
that's a
where I
great way
was
to put
like,
it. Yes,
I get what you were trying to say here. I get that I could understand your feelings about Sharon Tate and your feelings about this era more than I could tell your feelings of the ending of World War II, right? It's not nearly as personal for him as the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is for him.
that's a great point. I think you put the nail on the head in terms of class, where it kind of felt like killing off Hitler at the end of Inglorious Bastards. Again, I don't know if like again maybe Tarantino was trying to like use it to you know subvert expectations, or maybe he just thought it would be funny or just like surprise. Um, and again, that's fine. But again, I really think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the ending, and it's again, the more I talk about the film, the more fascinating I find it. Where you don't really get that the first time you watch it. You're kind of just like almost kind of confused as to what's going on because the build up to it is it's not even as like sudden and shocking. Like, that's the thing with Inglorious Bastards. It was very sudden and shocking. It's like it happens in the course of like 15 seconds. Whereas Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's building up to this event that you know is going to happen. But then it doesn't just like something doesn't go wrong suddenly. It kind of veers off slowly, and then you're kind of like watching. You're like, wait a minute, what's going on? And then again, the ending sequence, and then the ending. You're like, oh, okay, now I understand what you're trying to say with this.
Yep. So, well, that's our hour there. Hope you guys enjoyed this discussion of. I mean, we framed it as Pulp Fiction, but we ended up
Yeah, we didn't
talking about a
talk them.
whole
I
lot.
was gonna say.
I think Pulp Fiction is so iconic, and like everyone has seen it a million times
Yeah,
that
we can name this like Pulp Fiction and the films of Tarantino. If
yeah, it's like
we can, yeah,
it's all a part of it. So,
yeah.
well, thank you guys for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode. No one's a critic coming soon.
Take care, y'all.